Everyone in the ballroom froze when the question dropped like a bomb, one that no amount of money or reputation could silence. At a glamorous press conference meant to celebrate her latest real estate venture, billionaire, entrepreneur Catherine Whitmore never expected the spotlight to shift so sharply. A CNN journalist stood and asked, "Miss Whitmore, is it true you fired your driver without notice, forcing him to sleep in his car during last week's snowstorm?" For a split second, the woman, known as a philanthropic icon, lost her composure. But sitting quietly in the third row was Elijah Brooks, the man at the heart of the storm. Once her loyal driver, now her greatest threat. Elijah, a Harvard-educated man with a photographic memory, had spent 4 years behind the pruditor wheel, silently absorbing every corrupt deal and cruel comment Catherine uttered. When she fired him for arriving 15 minutes late, after spending the night at the ER with his asthmatic daughter, she believed he would disappear. Instead, he recorded, remembered, and returned with a plan. As cameras rolled and investors held their breath, Elijah revealed recordings, documents, and damning quotes, exposing Catherine's racism, fraud, and hypocrisy. But what truly shocked the world wasn't just her fall. It was the brilliance of the man she had dismissed as invisible. Elijah didn't seek revenge. He sought justice. And with calm precision, he proved that the underestimated often become the most dangerous. She built an empire on image, wealth, and selective generosity. But what brought her down wasn't a scandal. It was the man she never truly saw. For 4 years, Elijah Brooks sat behind the wheel of Catherine Whitmore's luxury BMW. He opened her doors, drove her to charity galas, listened in silence as she bragged about her donations, her philanthropy, her commitment to social justice. To the world, Catherine was a modern saint, a billionaire real estate mogul who championed diversity and progress. But behind the tinted glass, her true self spoke freely, because Elijah, a black chauffeur, wasn't supposed to matter. What Catherine never asked, never cared to know, was that Elijah wasn't just a driver. He was a magna cum laude business graduate from Howard University. He had taken the job to care for his diabetic mother and raise his daughter Sophie alone after the tragic death of his wife. And while he drove through Manhattan traffic, he listened, recorded, observed, filed away every shady deal, every demeaning remark, every corrupt whisper. Not because he was bitter, but because he knew this day would come. That day arrived during a snowstorm. Elijah arrived 15 minutes late to pick Catherine up, after spending the night at the hospital with his daughter during a severe asthma attack. He tried to explain. She cut him off. "I don't care about your excuses," she said, eyes glued to her phone. "You're done. Get your things." Today, she didn't just fire him. She evicted him from his staff apartment, leaving him and his daughter to sleep in their car during a blizzard. What Catherine didn't know was that this final act of cruelty wasn't an ending. It was the ignition switch to a reckoning. Elijah reached out to Rachel Monroe, a CNN investigative journalist long eager to uncover the truth about corruption in New York's real estate world. When Elijah recited verbatim phone calls, dates, amounts, even incriminating conversations about illegal property deals, Rachel listened. And when he opened his briefcase filled with documents, voice recordings, and photos of confidential papers Catherine had left behind in her back seat, she realized this was bigger than one unjust firing. This was a blueprint of systemic corruption built by a woman praised for her virtue. 3 weeks later, Catherine stood in a ballroom filled with investors and cameras. It was supposed to be her triumphant moment. But when the CNN reporter asked about Elijah, her mask cracked. She denied it all, until Elijah stood up, calm, composed, and opened his briefcase. He played recordings of her mocking working-class families. He displayed messages proving she ignored his pleas for mercy. Then came the bombshell. Tax evasion, forged housing, contracts, bribes to city officials. One by one, the room turned against her. She begged Elijah to stop, offered money, pleaded for privacy. But Elijah wasn't after revenge. He told the cameras, "This isn't about destroying someone. It's about stopping the destruction of those who don't have a voice." Then he introduced Rachel Monroe to the stage. She confirmed every allegation. And when Elijah revealed one last recording, Catherine bragging about displacing black families with legal tricks, the room erupted. Investors left, phones lit up, IRS agents stepped forward with avarant. Catherine Whitmore, once untouchable, was arrested on live television. 6 months later, Elijah didn't vanish. He rose. With the rights to his story, he founded the Pruslish Justice Drive Foundation, helping workers like him fight back against abuse and exploitation. His daughter now slept in a warm bed, no longer coughing through cold nights. And Catherine? She was inmate number 45,472, serving 5 years for tax fraud and corruption. Elijah never gloated. When asked if he regretted bringing her down, he answered softly, "I didn't bring her down. She did that herself. I just refused to stay silent." They thought he was just a driver. But when he opened his briefcase, the entire room realized they were watching the rise of a man they had spent years overlooking. Elijah Brooks had spent 4 quiet years driving Catherine Whitmore, New York's most celebrated real estate billionaire. To the outside world, she was the face of charity and social justice, gracing magazine covers, donating millions, championing inclusion. But behind her, tinted limousine windows, Catherine was something else entirely. Cold, calculating, and deeply prejudiced. And for 4 years, she never once stopped to wonder who the man behind the wheel truly was. She never knew that Elijah had graduated with top honors from Howard University, specializing in business systems and organizational ethics. She never asked why someone with that background would take a job driving. And most of all, she never suspected that Elijah had been quietly building a case, one humiliating, quote, one shady deal, one whispered slur at a time. It all started the day she fired him. Over a 15-minute delay. His daughter, 8-year-old Sophie, had suffered a dangerous asthma attack, and Elijah had spent the night at the ER. When he tried to explain, Catherine waved him off. "Don't bring drama into my life. You're replaceable," she said. Then she had him evicted from his company apartment the same day. No warning. No mercy. For days, Elijah and Sophie lived in his car. But he didn't collapse. He strategized. He contacted Rachel Monroe, a respected CNN journalist. "I've got 4 years of recorded conversations, documents, and patterns of criminal behavior," he said calmly. At first, Rachel was skeptical, until Elijah began quoting word-for-word phone calls, dates of bribes, and even offshore account numbers. Within a week, they were working like detectives. Rachel cross-referenced every lead. Everything checked out. 3 weeks later, at a luxury press conference meant to celebrate Catherine's newest multi-million-dollar project, the trap was set. As reporters filled the Ritz Hotel ballroom, Catherine stood proud, unaware her downfall was minutes away. Then came the question that shattered everything. "Miss Whitmore, is it true you fired Elijah Brooks without warning, forcing him and his daughter to sleep in a car during last week's snowstorm?" Catherine froze. "I don't know what you're referring to," she stammered. Then Elijah stood. Calm, composed, he opened his black briefcase in front of hundreds of cameras. Inside, medical records for his daughter, text messages pleading for 15 minutes, audio recordings of Catherine's racist remarks, and documents showing illegal property deals and forged contracts. The final blow, a voice recording of Catherine saying, "These people don't deserve to be in the same spaces as us. If they can't keep up, Send them back where they came from. The room went silent. Investors shifted uncomfortably. Some walked out. Catherine tried to spin it taken out of context, she said. But Rachel Monroe stepped forward, showing her CNN badge and confirming everything Elijah said was verified and true. One by one, Elijah exposed the empire Catherine built on silence and fear displacing. Minority families, bribing officials, and using her philanthropy as a cover for corruption. She offered money to settle. Elijah refused. This isn't about money. This is about justice. Then came the final twist. Elijah wasn't just a driver. He had been studying her, analyzing her, documenting her crimes with the precision of a forensic accountant. He revealed offshore accounts, tax fraud, and illegal deals hidden behind charities. The IRS arrived within minutes. Catherine was arrested on the spot. 6 months later, Elijah sat in his office as executive director of the Justice Drive Foundation, funded by the rights to his story. His work had already helped over 200 workers reclaim wages, housing, and dignity. Sophie, now thriving in school, no longer feared the procured cold. When asked if he regretted anything, Elijah simply said, "Catherine built her destruction with her own words. I just kept the receipts." When the cameras turned to him, the man they had ignored for years stood with a calmness that silenced the room. Because what he had wasn't just proof, it was a plan. Elijah Brooks had once been invisible. For 4 years, he quietly opened car doors, adjusted the seat, and drove billionaire Catherine Whitmore to her meetings, fundraisers, and award Catherine Whitmore ceremonies. She never asked about his background. She never cared that he had a daughter or a diabetic mother. To her, Elijah was just another black employee, filling a role. Nothing more, nothing less. What she didn't know was that Elijah had a photographic memory, a degree in business from Howard University, and a painful reason for taking the job. After his wife passed away, he needed stability to care for his daughter, Sophie, and his ailing mother. What began as survival became strategy. Because while Catherine spoke freely in the back seat, believing he wasn't listening, Elijah was documenting everything. The day she fired him, she thought she'd won. He had arrived late, only 15 minutes after Sophie was rushed to the hospital with a severe asthma attack. He tried to explain. Catherine didn't care. "You people always have excuses," she snapped. "Pack your things. You're done." And just like that, Elijah and his daughter were homeless. They slept in his car during a snowstorm. And yet, instead of crumbling, Elijah made a decision. She had taken everything from him, but he had been collecting everything she had to hide. Elijah contacted Rachel Monroe, an investigative reporter from CNN. "I have 4 years of recordings, documents, and statements, all real, all verified," he told her. After a single meeting, Rachel knew she was sitting on the biggest story of the year, a scandal that could shake New York's elite. They spent 3 weeks preparing, cross-checking, verifying, planning. The press conference at the Ritz Hotel was supposed to showcase Catherine's newest $80 million housing development. The ballroom was packed with journalists, investors, and VIPs. Catherine wore pearls in confidence. She had no idea her past was about to unravel on live television. When the reporter asked about Elijah, Catherine faltered. But when Elijah himself stood up, holding a black briefcase, the entire energy in the room shifted. "Are you sure you want to continue with this version of the story, Miss Whitmore?" he asked. Then, calmly and methodically, Elijah began revealing documents. Voice recordings of Catherine insulting black employees, texts he sent begging for compassion, medical records, proving his daughter's emergency. But it didn't stop there. He exposed illegal housing evictions, bribes to city inspectors, and off-the-books accounts in the Cayman Islands. Rachel Monroe stood beside him and confirmed every single detail. Catherine, once seen as a symbol of progress, watched in horror as her empire collapsed in real time. Her attempts to deny, deflect, and dismiss only made things worse, especially when she shouted, "You're believing a driver over me?" That sentence became her undoing. Elijah looked at her and replied, "And it's exactly that arrogance that brought you here today." He wasn't done. In front of cameras broadcasting to millions, he exposed the secret behind Catherine's most controversial housing deal, where she displaced 17 black families using forged contracts. When confronted with audio of her saying, "They can't read contracts. Make it complicated," the room erupted. Investors walked out. Phones buzzed. IRS agents moved in. Catherine was arrested on the spot. 6 months later, Elijah was no longer just a former chauffeur. He was the founder of the Justice Drive Foundation, helping other exploited workers stand up to abuse. His story had gone viral, earning praise and support from across the country. When Sophie asked him, "Do you regret anything, Daddy?" Elijah held her hand, answered, "No, baby. I didn't ruin her life. She did that herself. I just made sure the world saw it." She thought he was beneath her, but when he stepped forward in front of the cameras, calm and confident, the world realized he wasn't just a driver. He was the reckoning. For 4 years, Elijah Brooks drove Catherine Whitmore's luxury car through Manhattan's bustling streets. He opened doors, stayed silent during private calls, and witnessed every side of the billionaire real estate mogul. Catherine was known as a generous philanthropist, a champion for diversity and equality. Awards lined her office walls. Journalists praised her. But in the backseat of her BMW, she showed her real face, one laced with arrogance, cruelty, and prejudice. Elijah had been invisible to her, just a driver, a black man with no name and no value beyond. The task at hand, she never asked about his life, never questioned why someone with poise and precision would settle for that job. If she had, she might have learned that Elijah held a business degree from Howard University and a photographic memory. But she never cared to look beyond the uniform. Everything changed on a cold December morning. Elijah arrived 15 minutes late. His daughter Sophie had been hospitalized overnight with a severe asthma attack. He tried to explain. Catherine didn't listen. "You people always have an excuse," she snapped, eyes fixed on her phone. "Get your things and go." Without warning, she fired him and evicted him from his staff housing. Just like that, he and his daughter were sleeping in a car during a snowstorm. But Elijah didn't break. He began planning. For years, he had quietly recorded phone calls, memorized conversations, and collected discarded documents left in her back seat. He had watched corruption unfold from the rearview mirror. He just hadn't acted. Until now, Elijah reached out to Rachel Monroe, an investigative journalist for CNN. He handed her names, dates, and proof. Catherine's empire, it turned out, was built on a mountain of illegal deals, discriminatory practices, and tax fraud. Rachel, stunned by the depth of evidence, helped prepare the final blow. The stage was set at a high-profile press conference. Catherine stood proudly, expecting to bask in praise from investors and media. But one question shattered her illusion. "Miss Whitmore, is it true you fired Elijah Brooks without notice, forcing him and his daughter to sleep in a car during a snowstorm?" Catherine's confident smile faded. Then Elijah rose. With chilling calm, he opened his briefcase and revealed years of evidence, medical records for his daughter, voicemails from Catherine dismissing his pleas, audio of her mocking black employees, proof of bribery, forged contracts, and offshore accounts. Each piece of evidence peeled back the mask she'd worn for decades. She tried to silence him, offered money, pleaded, denied. But it was too late. Rachel Monroe confirmed every allegation. The room turned cold. Investors backed away. Some left. IRS agents stepped forward. Catherine panicked. "You're ruining everything I built," she cried. "No," Elijah replied. "You did that yourself. I just took notes." In the months that followed, Catherine's empire crumbled. She was sentenced to 5 years in federal prison for tax fraud and corruption. Her name was scrubbed from awards, her assets seized, her allies gone. But Elijah didn't stop there. With the proceeds from the media rights to his story, he launched the Justice Drive Foundation, which helps workers like himself take legal action against abusive employers. Over 200 workers have received housing, legal aid, or wage compensation through his efforts. His daughter Sophie sleeps in a warm bed. His mother receives proper medical care. And Elijah, he's no longer invisible. Asked if he regrets anything, he simply says, "Catherine taught me one thing. Never underestimate the power of someone who's been quiet for too long. The most dangerous person in the room isn't the loudest. It's the one who remembers everything." She wore pearls, gave speeches about equality, and smiled for cameras. But when her driver stood up, briefcase in hand, the room discovered who truly had the power. For years, Catherine Whitmore was the face of corporate virtue, a billionaire real estate mogul. She graced magazine covers for her philanthropy, spoke at diversity summits, and donated millions to public housing projects. To the public, she was untouchable, a woman whose reputation for justice seemed beyond question. But the man behind her car's steering wheel saw another side. Elijah Brooks, her private driver for 4 years, was calm, quiet, and efficient. Catherine never asked about his background, never cared to know he had a daughter, never even used his full name. To her, he was just the help. A black man whose job was to drive and stay silent. She didn't know Elijah held a business degree from Howard University. She didn't know he had a photographic memory. And she certainly didn't know that for 4 years he had been quietly collecting everything she wanted hidden. The turning point came on a snowy December morning. Elijah arrived Lima Blas minutes late. His daughter, Sophie, had suffered a severe asthma attack, and he'd spent the night in the ER. When he tried to explain, Catherine didn't even look up from her phone. "I don't care about your excuses. You're fired," she said coldly. Then she had him evicted from his staff housing. The same day, with nowhere to go, Elijah and Sophie slept in their car during a blizzard. But that night, he made a choice. He wasn't just going to survive. He was going to expose her. For 4 years, Elijah had listened to Catherine's private phone calls, observed her back door, business deals, watched her manipulate public image while privately mocking the very communities she claimed to support. He had documented shady property contracts, recordings of racial slurs, and illegal conversations with city officials. And now, he reached out to Rachel Monroe, an investigative journalist with CNN. Rachel was skeptical, until Elijah quoted phone calls word for word, recited confidential deal numbers from memory, and showed her documents Catherine left in her car. Together, they cross-checked the evidence and uncovered a massive scheme: fraud, corruption, tax evasion, and systemic racial discrimination. 3 weeks later, at a luxurious press conference to announce Catherine's latest housing development, Elijah made his move. When a reporter asked about the firing, Catherine scoffed, dismissing it as a personnel issue. That's when Elijah stood up from the third row, opened his briefcase, and turned the entire room silent. One by one, he revealed the truth. Asterisk. Text messages showing his plea for just 15 minutes grace to help his daughter. Asterisk. Audio of Catherine saying, "People like him always have excuses. Send them back to the ghetto." Asterisk. Signed documents proving illegal evictions of black families. Asterisk. Recordings of her manipulating city officials through bribes. Asterisk. Tax records showing secret offshore accounts. And then came the final blow. "You never asked who I really was, Catherine," Elijah said. "You never wondered why someone with my education and skills stayed silent for so long. You thought I was just your driver. But I was your witness, your mirror. And now, I'm your consequence." Rachel Monroe confirmed every piece of evidence on live television. Within minutes, investors began to walk out. The IRS stepped in. Catherine was arrested on the spot. 6 months later, she was sentenced to 5 years in prison. Her empire collapsed. Her name became synonymous with hypocrisy. But Elijah didn't disappear. He used the royalties from his story to launch the Justice Drive Foundation, which helps wrongfully terminated and exploited employees fight back. His daughter Sophie now attends a private school on scholarship. His mother receives full medical care. And Elijah? He's no longer behind the wheel. He's behind a movement. When asked why he did it, he said, "True justice isn't just punishment. It's rebuilding what was broken and making sure no one else gets left sleeping in the cold." Catherine Whitmore always believed power was about being seen. But when her former plank driver stood up in silence, the world realized. True power is what you do when no one's looking. For years, Elijah Brooks lived in the background of Catherine's life. He opened her car door, drove her through Manhattan's chaos, and listened while she whispered secrets into her phone. Catherine, New York's real estate queen and self-proclaimed philanthropist, never once asked about his life, never knew he had a daughter named Sophie, never guessed he was educated, strategic, or capable of dismantling everything she built. She thought he was just a black driver. Elijah had graduated magna cum laude from Howard University with a degree in business. After his wife's tragic death, he left a promising career to care for Sophie and his diabetic mother. He took the chauffeur job not out of defeat, but as strategy. Because in the back seat of power, people reveal their true selves. Catherine never imagined her worst enemy was quietly memorizing every word she said. When she fired Elijah for arriving 15 minutes late after a night at the hospital with his daughter, she didn't hesitate. "You people always have excuses," she snapped, without even looking up from her phone. That same day, she had him evicted. He and Sophie slept in a freezing car, wrapped in coats and quiet resilience. But that night, Elijah made a decision. Catherine's cruelty would not end him. It would awaken him. For years, he had mentally recorded every unethical deal, every racist remark, every illegal bribe Catherine made, believing no one noticed. Now, he had something to fight with. He contacted Rachel Monroe, a CNN investigative reporter. What began as a tip became a 3-week investigation revealing a vast network of fraud, forged documents, racial discrimination, and tax evasion. The final act took place at Catherine's press conference. She stood at the Ritz Hotel ballroom, surrounded by cameras, ready to unveil her next housing project. It was supposed to be her crowning moment. Then came the question, "Miss Whitmore, is it true you fired your longtime driver without notice, forcing him to sleep in his car during a snowstorm?" She laughed nervously, denying everything. That's when Elijah stood up. Calm, measured, intentional. He opened a black briefcase and held up a series of documents. Text messages showing he asked for 15 minutes to care for his daughter. Medical records from the hospital. Audio recordings of Catherine saying, "Send them back to the ghetto," and "These people don't understand real work." Signed contracts evicting minority tenants with forged legal language. Audio of bribes to city inspectors. Offshore bank transfer instructions spoken aloud from the back seat. And finally a quote Catherine said to her lawyer, "Use complicated legal terms. They won't understand it anyway." Rachel Monroe stepped forward and confirmed. Every detail had been independently verified by CNN. Investors fled the room. IRS agents entered with warrants. Catherine panicked. "You're going to destroy me," she whispered. But Elijah calmly replied, "You destroyed yourself. I just kept the receipts." Catherine was arrested for tax fraud, corruption, and discrimination. Her empire collapsed. Her legacy dissolved overnight. 6 months later, Elijah sat in his office on the 23rd floor of a Manhattan skyscraper. With funds from the rights to his story, he created the Justice Drive Foundation, helping employees fight corporate abuse. Sophie thrived in school. His mother had full medical support. When asked by a journalist if he sought revenge, Elijah answered with quiet strength, "Revenge is about ego. Justice is about purpose. I didn't want to hurt Catherine. I wanted to make sure no one like Sophie would ever sleep in a car because of someone like her again." "Daddy, why can't we go home?" Sophie whispered from the back seat, her tiny breath fogging up the cold window. Elijah Brooks looked at his daughter, wrapped in a borrowed coat, and made a promise in silence. Not of revenge, but of justice. Just days earlier, Elijah had been a loyal chauffeur to billionaire Catherine Whitmore, a woman praised for her charity but merciless behind closed doors. When Elijah arrived 15 minutes late after rushing his daughter to the ER, Catherine fired him without warning and evicted him the same day. She didn't care that he and Sophie would sleep in a freezing car. She didn't care because she never saw him as human. But what she didn't know was that Elijah had spent 4 years quietly recording her corrupt business dealings, racist remarks, and fraudulent schemes. With the help of a CNN journalist, he exposed it all live, in front of the very cameras Catherine used to polish her image. In the end, she didn't just lose her company, she lost everything. And Elijah, he rose, not with bitterness, but with purpose. True strength isn't about revenge. It's about protecting those we love and rising with dignity. Elijah's story reminds us, never underestimate someone who suffers in silence, because silence doesn't mean weakness. Sometimes it's the beginning of something powerful. Did this story touch your heart? Comment below with your thoughts. Don't forget to subscribe for more powerful true stories that prove justice may be slow, but it always arrives.